In this episode, we do our first on air review of a member of our community's student loans. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. Hello, my name is Brenton Harrison of Escape Student Loan Debt and your host for the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast. This is a unique episode because it's the first episode where we're going to take a member of our community who has a student loan story or structure that we feel is instructive to the rest of you. And we're going to, for lack of a better phrase, bring them on stage or bring them on the big screen and put their loans up and talk through the strategy together. The person that we're interviewing, who was very gracious with their time, is someone who has two separate sets of loans from different periods of schooling that have radically different amounts of progress towards public service loan forgiveness. And there are some unique wrinkles based on what's going on with the courts right now when it comes to what would happen if that person decided to just pursue one set of loans for forgiveness and leave the second set off to their own, or whether they should consolidate them and try to get all of their loans a little closer towards forgiveness. So in this episode, we not only talk about the pros and cons of each of those strategies, but we also talk about kind of like the unique wrinkle that's presented by the current court cases in a way that I think is helpful or will be helpful to some of you in the audience. So I hope you enjoy it. This is something that we're going to do more of. As I shared in the last episode, we can't review everybody's student loans for free. It's more so something that we're going to do when we feel like this person's loans can help other people in the community. But if it's more straightforward, as I've shared, we will do it via one of our traditional consultations. But if you want to have your student loans considered, you can go to escapestudentloandebt.com/review. And we'll go through the process of reviewing your strategy as well. Hope you all enjoy this episode. We hope to have more of them to come. So as I shared in the intro, this is our first series where we're going to be actually reviewing the loans of a federal student loan borrower and going through some information that we feel might be helpful for them and hopefully helpful for the audience as well. We have de-identified this person and we are so appreciative of their being willing to be the first guest on the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast. So we're going to call them Person One. Person One, thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
If you could, obviously without identifying yourself, tell me a little bit about your family makeup, your student loan journey. What brought you to this point?
Okay. Our family makeup, there's three of us. There's me, my husband, and our son. Our son is in his second year of college right now. I have student loans for my bachelor's degree from early 2000s. And then, as most people, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went back and got a master's degree after I realized what I wanted to do. So I have bachelor's degree and master's degree student loans.
Okay. And you and I talked a little bit before we press record, and I've gone through some of your information to have an idea of your loan makeup. But before we dig into your student loans, can you tell me what's a positive outcome for you? Like if we're leaving this call and you were going to pat yourself on the back and say, man, I'm glad I signed up for this. What needs to happen?
Well, I'm in the Public Loan Service Forgiveness Program, and as of this month, I would have hit my 120 months if there wasn't I'm on the SAVE plan, so those months haven't counted. So if I can figure out how to get those 120, maybe do a buyback and get the bachelor's degree loans erased, that would be lovely.
Okay, well, let's see what we can do in that regard. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to bring up some of the information that you've submitted, and we will see what we see. All right, I am going to start with your student loan statement. So you have sent in the details for all of your student loans. Just in case you are listening and not watching, I am going to explain these to you, but if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see all this information on screen. So it looks like in total you have about $83,000 worth of loans. As you mentioned, they are split between two different periods of schooling. If I'm looking correctly, it looks like of that 83,000, about 50,000 of it came from your bachelor's degree, and it looks like there's about 33,000 that came from your master's degree. Is that about right?
Yes, actually, that first set was a little bit of post bachelor's degree because I'm in accounting. I took some classes to sit for the CPA, but
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And if I'm looking at this, as you said, you are in the Save Plan forbearance. About how long did you sign up for the Save Plan as soon as it was opened? How did you land on the Save Plan?
yes, I signed up as soon as it was open.
Okay. And then my last question, not of the day, but my last question regarding the Save Plan is, did you ever get to the point where you were able to make payments on the plan? Or by the time you signed up, had they already started the process of putting people in forbearance?
I think I made about 3 months of payments on the safe,
Okay. And around about what was the payment at that time?
about $360.
Okay, $360 a month. Okay, all right. Now, I want to go to the second statement that you sent, and this statement details the amount of credit that you have towards public service loan forgiveness for these two sets of loans. You put a notation, as you mentioned, that this month, yeah, I think you said, is the month that you would hit your 120. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and it looks like, in terms of what's already been credited of that first chunk that we're really trying to get a hold of today, those loans have 107 months that have already been credited. So you have 13 months left to go, and it looks like on the previous set, or I should say the set from the masters, you have 13 qualifying payments of the 120, so a big gap between those two different loans.
Yes,
Okay.
I imagine those probably I'll pay them off before I hit the 10 years on public loan service, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that because I think you are on the right track there, but I want to kind of show you how the numbers play out because I have a potential recommendation that might provide some value, but we'll see. So let's start with the loans that are close to having them forgiven. We talked offline, I should say, that in the information you sent, you were interested in doing the PSLF buyback.
Yes.
Well, just in case you are listening and you are unfamiliar with that plan, the PSLF buyback is an opportunity that we've kind of been waiting to see if this current administration will continue. But it was instituted by the previous administration. And the way that it works is you can go back in time starting at 2007, or if you consolidated your loans, starting when you consolidated your loans, in any period of time that your student loans were in forbearance or deferment, as long as that wasn't an in-school forbearance or deferment, what you can do is you can go and you can buy back those months when you weren't making payments. So person one, am I to understand that the months that you're trying to buy back are all of those the save forbearance, or were there any other periods that you're trying to buy back as well?
I have 4 months that I think would qualify for buyback, the safe.
Okay. Looking at your statement, it says, if we're like looking at the months that have an employer that's been certified, it says that you have 107 months that qualify, but you still need to certify the employment for 59 of those months. Is that, hey, I worked for a different employer and I just haven't gotten that form sent in yet, or they haven't signed it? Where do you stand on having those months of employment certified?
Employment's been certified through December. Of those 59 months, some of those were prior to working in public service. So even though
Gotcha.
they're saying that they need to be certified, they wouldn't count because that was when I was in private.
Okay, well that is even better. So let's walk through the process of what it would look like to apply for public service loan forgiveness buyback. If you're looking on screen, you are looking at the page from studentaid.gov, and I'm going to give you some good news as it relates to this program towards the end of this episode. But going through this program, it talks about all of the ways that you can see if you have months that are eligible. Person one, we are obviously going to assume that you're correct and that you can apply and get your 120th month, but that is a crucial element of the program. You cannot apply to buy back any months until you can prove that if you were to receive that past credit, you would have reached your 120th month. What does that mean? It means that if you know that there are months that you want to buy back, but if you receive that credit right now, you'd only be at 100 payments. You have to wait until you would have gotten your 120th month in order to do so. Now, I asked about you certifying that employment because that's a great answer, because if there were months that we were missing that certification, that actually is the first step. You want to go onto a page on the student aid website called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Help Tool, and it has all of the information that you need to certify your employment. You can either print a form and have them sign it and mail it back or fax it back, or now you even have the opportunity to email a form to someone who can verify your employment and have that done. Now, I want to ask person one, have you already tried to buy back the months of credit for these two loans?
Well, since I only hit my 120th month this month, I knew that they wouldn't take the form, but I actually did send the form in January because I was worried about the new administration coming in. And so even though I knew I wasn't going to hit my 120th month till March, I sent it in January. So maybe if they sat on it for a little bit, they decided not to take those anymore, that my form would still be there.
Okay, well, I'll give you some good news in that regard as well. I would consider reapplying now that this is actually the month. That's why I wanted to ask, because they state pretty explicitly that you need to wait until that 120th month would be the month that you get credit for. However, if you go in and apply, I wanted to make sure that when you do so, that you include this specific language. And they mention this on the site itself, but what they don't mention is like how adamant they are about having this language in the actual buyback request. This sentence says, and I quote, "I have at least 120 months of approved qualifying employment, and I am seeking PSLF or TEPSLF discharge through PSLF buyback. Please assess my eligibility for PSLF buyback." As random and as arbitrary as that sounds, if you do not have this sentence in your buyback request, they will not honor it. So I want to make sure, I think you're on the right track in terms of submitting that request. But when you do it for this month in March, I want to make sure that you include this specific language, because otherwise, once they process it, it could be the difference between them honoring their request and not honoring it.
Okay.
All right. Now, the next steps in that request, and I have no idea how long it will take. We've had some people when the program was first issued where they got it done in like a month, and then we've had others who submitted it around the same time and still haven't heard back. But in terms of what you can expect from communication, be clear that the communication will not come from your actual student loan servicer. So there's not really a method to check the status of that buyback request, because this is offered by the Department of Education. It's not offered by Mohila, which is who has your loans. So no need to call them, no need to email them. They're not going to have any information as to their request. If it is honored, you will eventually get communication directly from the Department of Education. And what they will do is they will send you a buyback agreement. So it's functionally a contract where they're going to tell you, here's all the information that we need to calculate what you would have paid during the periods of time that you missed. So for those 4 months, I think that you said that were not a part of that SAVE forbearance, I would, try to start tracking down the tax return for that year, because the SAVE forbearance is pretty straightforward. I would imagine that you have access to your most recent year or two's tax return. But those 4 months that you're missing, what year did that occur?
I think 2018 and 2019.
Okay, so I would go and start tracking down your 2018 and your 2019 tax return. In case you are unaware of how to do that, how you can do it is you can actually go to the IRS website. They will allow you to create a profile. And if you create that profile, they will give you a kind of a summary tax transcript of those past 2 years, but you can also request the full tax return itself. So start tracking down that 2018-2019 tax return, because what they will do is they will They will calculate your discretionary income for those years so that they can calculate a payment under the income-driven repayment plans. The next step will be they will figure out what is essentially for all the income-driven plans the lowest payment that you would have made. And they will ask you to make that payment to satisfy each month of the buyback agreement. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll get that agreement. You'll start working through the process of submitting that tax information, calculating your payment. Once that agreement is enacted, you have 90 days from the time it's enacted to make the full payment. It doesn't have to be a lump sum. It doesn't have to be any set increment per se. They may say like, hey, we can charge monthly, but just from the day 1 to day 90, that bill that they're asking you to pay, it has to be zeroed out by that 90th day. Otherwise, the agreement is void. Tracking with me? All right. Before we move forward, I do think that is the right path to take with these 2 loans. But do you have any questions about the details of that program before we move to the rest of your loans?
I do. I have 2 questions. Since I have other loans that don't qualify, are they just gonna? I was worried that they might just kick out the buyback agreement completely because they would see that those other loans aren't even close.
No.
Will they take it piece by piece?
They will take it piece by piece. And this is something that we come across, and it actually speaks to what we're going to talk about, in terms of how to handle the rest of those loans. This is where we have people where they will come to us and we'll have to weigh whether it's worth just trying to have those separate student loans forgiven or whether they should consolidate all of their loans, right? Like, hey, I have these 2 loans that are really close, but I have these other set of loans that, don't have much credit. Maybe I should just consolidate them. I would take my chances with them just forgiving the 2 loans, which they will do. We have seen it happen. And the reason that I would do that at this particular time has to do with the court cases that have wrapped up SAVE and all this litigation. As a part of those court cases, and I actually think that I have the page here, so let me share my screen again. We've talked about this on the podcast, but there's a ton of court cases that are currently going on that impact the SAVE plan, but they also impact essentially any legislation regarding student loans or any program that was created by the Department of Education as opposed to Congress. And that's really important because one of the things that the previous administration did when it comes to consolidating student loans is they changed the method of applying forgiveness credits to consolidated loans. Prior to the change, what would happen would be that if you had loans and you had paid on those loans for 12 years in one case, maybe 15 years in another case, and you consolidated them together, you would lose all of your credit towards income-driven repayment plan forgiveness and public service loan forgiveness. So you would be going from 12 years, 15 years to 0 years of credit. So it was really punitive to consolidate. What the previous administration did was they changed it and they said, if you consolidate, we're going to look at your student loan balance for each respective loan and how many years credit you have for each of those loans. And we're going to give you credit for the weighted average. Weighted average is a really unnecessarily complex financial term, but the premise of it is if I consolidate loans and I owe different amounts, the loan that weighs the most, meaning that I have the biggest balance on those loans, the amount of forgiveness credit I have is going to shift towards the bigger loans. So an example I would give is if you owe $200,000 worth of student loans and $50,000 of that has 20 years worth of credit, but the other 150 has 1 year worth of credit, the weighted average is going to shift towards that 1 year because it's the heavier number. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, the problem is the previous administration created that, but they created it through the Department of Education. So as a result of the court ruling that has put all of that on pause, one of the things that they have put on pause is giving the weighted average credit towards consolidated loans. So there has not been much that I've seen to verify how they'll handle it, but my concern would be if you try to consolidate these loans to kind of pull up the ones with lower credit, that they might reset your payment credits to zero as opposed to giving you the weighted average. So to me, I don't know that that's a risk that I would be willing to take until we have a little more clarity.
Yeah.
Just for so you can see what the numbers show, let me pull it up. I actually ran some numbers prior to our time in terms of what your weighted average would be. So let me pull that up so you can see. If you're looking on screen, you're looking at a weighted average calculator, and I took the $50,000 of loans that person one has that has 107 months of credit, and then the 33,000 she has that have 13 months of credit, put it in a weighted average calculator. The weighted average would be just under 70 months credit. So for the loans that only have 13 months, they'd be getting a pretty good bump. We'd be going from 13 to about 70. For the loans that are at 107, they'd be going down from 107 to 70. If we knew that they would be handled this way, then at least you'd have a bit more of a decision to make. But now that we know there's a possibility that you might consolidate and go back to zero again, a year from now when they've given more clarity, this may be something where you might have made a different decision. But with what you have in front of you right now, I would argue this is probably the best decision you can make based on those variables. All right. Now, the next question I have, and I'm going to, let's see here, talk about household income a bit. Don't need to get into, specifics of who owes what or who, but I would like to know if you combined your household income. I think when I looked on your tax return, it was between $160,000 to $170,000. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, let's operate under the assumption that we get what we're looking for in those 2 months of, those two loans that have about $50,000 are just wiped away. They're forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. Now you have a series of loans that are left that collectively are about $33,000. In that scenario, what would be your preferred way of getting rid of those loans?
I feel like with our income, I'll just have to do like a standard payment plan. And what I would do would be try to pay more on the lowest one and then just kind of snowball it till they were paid off. I imagine I could probably do that in less than 10 years.
Yeah, I actually think that not only is that the wise option, I think that it's going to end up being the only option that you have. And part of it, and the reason I'm talking about the loan balance that would remain as compared to your household income, we've talked about on the podcast in the past where it's like once you get to the point where you kind of owe less than what you make, you start to need to think, you need to start thinking about actually paying it off in full because of what's called a partial financial hardship. A partial financial hardship just means that if you try to apply to an income-based repayment plan and they calculate your payment and they find out that it would actually cost you less to just pay it off in 10 years as compared to signing up for that income-based repayment plan, they will not let you make that income-based repayment. So for looking at those loans that remain, you talked about, doing a snowball. We can't see the interest rate since they're all in save forbearance, but there are two ways that you could attack that snowball. It could be, take the lowest loan balance first and just put extra on that payment and then, tackle the one with the next lowest loan balance. In most cases that if you're trying to have like the motivation of, paying off something and getting that extra kick to keep going, that can be something that can be very helpful. Another way to go about it, which again, it just depends on what you prefer, would be to tackle the one with the highest interest rate. in terms of, and I wouldn't even just think about like the number of the interest rate. I would be thinking about literally the total interest that's accruing. So an example would be a $20,000 loan at 5% interest may be accruing more interest on a yearly basis than a $7,000 loan at 10% interest. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's just different factors that you could consider. But what I did was I plugged your information for you and your spouse into our Escape Student Loan Debt calculator so that you can just kind of see what you alluded to, and I think is spot on. I put your adjusted gross income from your previous year's tax return, which is $161,000, give or take. I put your family size of 3 people. I put a student loan balance of $33,000. So we're going to assume, like I said, that those other 2 loans are wiped away. And because we can't see the interest rate on your student loan statement, I just assumed it was around 7% interest. And if you look over at the calculation that you see for the different payment plans, you see the pay-as-you-earn / new income-based repayment plan, the old income-based repayment plan, and the 10-year standard plan. And under this option, you'll see that all 3 show the exact same amount per month. It shows $383.16 per month. That is not because all of them have the same way to calculate payments. It's because under all 3 of these options, what has happened is they've calculated what you would pay under the income-based repayment or income-driven repayment plans. And it is so much higher than what it would be to just pay it off in 10 years, it has just reverted you to the 10-year payment. Now, the good thing is, you said you were paying $360 a month on Save prior to all this changing. At $383 a month, not that there's a positive to having to continue to pay these loans, but at least we're in a situation where, because that loan balance would have dropped in this scenario, it's costing you significantly less than it would have if we continue to be on income-driven repayment plans.
Okay.
The last thing, and this would come after we have gotten all of these things accomplished. So after we've done public service loan forgiveness buyback, after we've gone through the process of determining what your interest rate is on those remaining loans, so on and so forth, if you're in the scenario where, you'd be owing, in terms of what you owe compared to what you make, you're talking about less than 20%. So definitely want to optimize our repayment as compared to having it forgiven. And when that is the case, and you're nowhere near owing about what you make or owing more than what you make, you want to make sure that you have the best interest rate and best repayment terms possible. So I can't see the interest rate on your federal student loans right now, but whenever you figure out what that rate is, you need to be in the category of people who I tell consistently, hey, set a calendar reminder for every quarter and start checking the interest rate for private student loans. And if you get to the point where there's a big gap, to me, a big gap would be like at least 0.5% or more between what you have on your federal loan and what you have on a private loan, then I would start to consider, if that ever occurs, looking into refinancing with a private lender. I have up on screen one last thing that I want you to see. I'm going to look at this student loan refinance calculator. This is not an endorsement for SoFi. They just have a quick calculator that's available on their website. So we're going to put in $33,000 of remaining loans. Again, for conversation's sake, we're going to assume that you have an interest rate of 7%. We're going to look and see what your payment would be if we had 120 months left, which is 10 years. In that scenario, your payment, just like we calculated on our calculator, would be $383 a month. But if you go down here to the interest rate, they will show you that at least with SoFi, and this is dependent on a number of factors such as your credit, your income, they have rates for 10-year loans as low as 5.22%. So in this scenario, if you do have a 7% interest rate, and you do have stellar credit, which you do, I've looked at your credit score, then you would consider, or I would consider saying, hey, I can save myself almost 2% if I get the best rate on this private student loan. Let me do a soft pull of my credit, which most private student loan lenders will give you a soft pull of your credit, and they will give you an idea of what your interest rate will be without you actually having to apply. That's why I would recommend that on a quarterly basis, you kind of keep your eye on rates, because it may be, maybe not this year, but maybe even 2 years into that repayment, 3 years into that repayment, you might find yourself in a position where you can drop down to a 7-year or a 5-year and keep your payment the same while saving a lot of money because of that difference in interest rates.
Okay.
All right. Now, I know that was a whole lot of information, but for that second piece, those loans that would be remaining, do you have any questions about that process?
I don't think so. I had those loans during the pandemic, and called my loan servicer at the time. It was Fed Loan Servicing, and asked them to take them out of in-school forbearance. They didn't do it, so those COVID months didn't count. If they would have, then I'd only have 7 years left on. I don't think that they would go back and to reverse that decision. So I think I'm just gonna have to.
I think you're right there. Those types of things are notoriously difficult to get reversed in any administration. The one thing I would say in terms of, because I teased this and I'm now remembering that I didn't forget I forgot to bring it up, I should say. Some of the things that were recently released in guidance by the Department of Education, it does not give a lot of sunshine to the possibility of you getting those in-school deferment or in-school forbearance months changed. But one of the things that they did say in terms of options for borrowers who are navigating these times is they actually mentioned public service loan forgiveness buyback. Like, they put it as an option for people who are still experiencing SAVE forbearance and things of that nature. So to me, that's a real positive, because we were worried that the incoming administration would do away with public service loan forgiveness buyback. So the fact that they are not only mentioning it as an option, but there's been no indication in this release that it's something that they're like evaluating. At least we know that for the bulk of your loans, that option exists. And if you get those 4 months credit, as you mentioned, in that buyback process, hopefully they shine a little happier light or brighter light on it than you trying to get that reversed through your loan servicer, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Well, like I said, that was a lot. I'm hoping that this was a positive experience for you. We are extremely grateful for your time. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Can't think of anything else except for thank you so much for doing this podcast. It's really relieved some anxiety of all the changes that have been happening, and I think you guys do a great job.
Oh man, I appreciate that so much. I am honored that you are a listener, and I am looking forward to the day that you no longer have to be a listener. How about that? From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.